Hello, welcome to Enlightning. We have a really exciting show today. I'm here with Mark Campbell, who's the CTO of Replicated, and here to talk to us about SchemaHero. Mark, tell us about yourself.
Hey Whitney, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Um, yeah, so I'm as you mentioned, my name is Mark Campbell. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Replicated. We've been in the space for about 8 years, helping companies like HashiCorp, Puppet, Harness, and others ship cloud native on-prem like installable versions of their application into their so that the end customer can actually manage it. And I think we'll probably have an opportunity to talk more about that as we go on.
When you say you're in the space, you've been in the
Mhm.
space for 8 years. What's this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started off early before Kubernetes. We've been around for a little over 8 years, and that actually predates the first public release of Kubernetes. So Docker was
Wow.
out. So like in containerization, in like figuring out how to make applications portable, which has now
Uh-huh.
transitioned into Kubernetes and the CNCF and the cloud native ecosystem now.
Okay, so you've been in the cloud native space and the before the cloud native space kind of even
Yeah,
really was called the cloud native space.
yeah, we can call it that. That sounds good.
I dig it. Where are you visiting us from right now?
I am outside of Los Angeles.
Nice, nice. We have a hello from Lisa. I think we need a new segment up top at the beginning of the show that's called Hello to Lisa segment. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for being such a wonderful supporter of the show. I appreciate you very much. Um, you were telling me in pre-show that you're getting some crazy weather right now.
We are, yeah. We're in the mountains outside of LA, and we had, I mean, just like crazy, insane amounts of snow, like record-setting amounts of snow. Like it's spent most of yesterday actually shoveling and snow blowing out under. I think we got about 16 feet of snow in the past week, which is a little bit crazy to be, like so close to LA and yet like this much snow and crazy weather.
16 feet. That's I'm
Yeah,
I'm I'm picturing you like opening your door and then just digging a tunnel through to like
that's
wherever you
pretty
need
much
to
what it
go.
is.
It's
Yeah, that's
oh
pretty much what it is. Like you can't shovel that, right? Like that's just too much to shovel. So
right.
it's consumed a lot of time digging out from
You're
it. There's
getting
still, yeah,
yeah, you're getting like a minor perspective. Like you need like a helmet with and a pick. It feels like a like
yeah,
Dig Dug video game. Yeah.
yeah. We were up on the roof last night, actually shoveling some snow off the roof because it was like so heavy. It's like, and neighbors having roofs collapse. We're like, this, we don't want that to happen. Let's take care of that in a couple of spots. So
Lisa, I think Lisa's asking me, or maybe you, like, do I even own a shovel? I don't own a snow shovel. No, I don't own. And in Ohio, I had like an ice pick for my car. I don't have that anymore. I don't have a snowblower, any of that stuff in Texas. What do you have
yeah,
all the right things? Are you used to snow?
we we did when we I spent 10 years living in LA and had nothing like that. But a couple of years ago, we moved here and we're at like 5,000 feet elevation. So we knew there would be some snow, not this much snow. So we
Okay.
did prepare a
Yeah.
little bit for
Nice. Yeah, I have even like a fireplace in my home that I just covered it over because it's
it.
like why in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um so I'm gonna put a link to Schemo Hero docs in the chat so we have those handy if anyone wants to check them out. Mark, you also said you have a podcast. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah. So I have a podcast. It's called the Kublist podcast.
Uh-huh.
And we really, it's not live like this, and it's audio only. So it's a little bit of a different format.
So you're feeling
But
a little vulnerable right now.
yeah, this is, I remember why I record them ahead of time and go through a little bit of editing. No, but I have a co-host, Benji, and I like will interview maintainers of CNCF projects, sandbox incubating graduated projects, and really just spend about an hour or so digging into like, as I'm sure like the conversation changes a lot depending on the stage and the maturity of the project. Sandbox projects,
Uh-huh.
we talk a lot about like why and like what's the future, and then graduated projects, get opportunity to talk about the community and things like that.
That sounds amazing. That's super cool. So we're up in the same space as far as that goes in the space.
It's fun, yeah.
As far as that goes. So I want to ask those of you who are in chat right now, give us, have you touched SchemaHero before? What are your database migrations like currently? Maybe Mark, you can ask more informed questions. I don't know very much now. But yeah, what's a question you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's it. Like database and schema migrations have obviously been around longer than Kubernetes, and it was we can call it a solved problem before Kubernetes. And I'm curious, if anybody's run into challenges taking the previous tools that existed before you moved into containerization in Kubernetes, and applied them there, or what new challenges you might actually be having. And then I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about like the specific challenges that we had, which led us to creating SchemaHero. But I'm curious to hear what other problems are out there running database schema migrations in a Kubernetes world.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that you said it was a solved problem and a new can of worms was opened with Kubernetes. Yeah. So one thing that you said Replicated works with specifically is shipping on-prem. And I thought that was really interesting. I know that so much has moved to the cloud. Like, what are some use cases with like why people are still shipping software on-prem or using entire systems that are all on-prem?
Yeah, I think that there's a few, and I think like before I actually answer that specific question about like what use cases, like I want to clarify on-prem is an interesting term that we've wrestled with a lot at Replicated. Do we even really want to call it that? Because a lot of the installations that we actually have, they're running in the cloud. It's really not on-prem bare metal server sitting in a server closet somewhere versus like, AWS or GCP or Azure or a cloud provider. It's really just who controls the environment and who has access to the data, the cluster, things like this. And so we're really focused on helping a vendor ship their software into customer controlled environments. And the use cases for that, kind of to your question are around, it might just be really sensitive data that you as an enterprise, you don't want to share. Or it might be that, you are running in a highly regulated environment and it's a totally disconnected air gapped environment, and you need to bring, you don't have a ton of Kubernetes expertise in the most extreme, and you want to run some application in there, but the application requires Kubernetes, no outbound internet access. You need to be able to like deliver that, help the end customer get it up and running without that expertise, and then like provide updates and think about day one and day two operations for it. And so that's a lot of the use cases that we actually see. So you end up really the larger enterprises are the ones that actually consume and run software, that is delivered into customer controlled environments. It's not generally like early stage startups. I can't hear you, so I can explain more. Is it mine? Winnie, I can't hear you. I don't know. AirPods, right? Like I that move on Zooms all the time. This reminds me earlier why like recording and editing is just like, it gives me this like, this happens all the time though. It happens even on the ones that we're recording ahead of time. So
my audio is coming through my computer. I don't know why my AirPods are acting up, but I kind of like that it gives a rawness or like a real humanness to the show, but also I don't want to feel like I'm wasting people's time, which I do right now. Yeah. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Great.
Does it work now?
I can hear you.
It's using it's. You're only hearing me because my computer microphone is on. Let me just get this. Actually, I'll walk away. Some sort of equivalent of off and on again. We can hear you. Let me see the settings. The ideal is if you heard me through my earbuds, but that's not happening. I have another set.
Yeah.
My computer's telling me my AirPods are nearby. Thank you. There we go. How about now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Oh,
Yes.
I don't hear myself anymore, so I think that we're good.
Great. What I love about this situation is like we're talking about like bleeding edge technology and we still can't get like our normal consumer stuff to work.
I know, right?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, y'all, for all your help. I appreciate you. And thank you also for your patience while we worked that out. Y'all are the best. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to erase this thing. So can you tell me while I erase this, like what's a really, working with on-prem, what's an interesting use case that you've come across lately?
I think that's a good question. I think that what we're seeing now, we've been, like I mentioned, we've been helping vendors ship software on-prem for 8 years. And there's like kind of two sides to this. There's like the vendor who's shipping their application and some of their interesting use cases, and then enterprises who are bringing more use cases in. I think the one that we were talking about earlier on the show was, or on the pre-show, was some of the work that's happening in AI, where the model, you want to be able to, as a software vendor, you're creating this model. You're an AI startup, and you want to like ship this software, let the enterprise run it, but they're creating a lot of data, and that data might be very novel to them, and they don't want to necessarily share, like that's proprietary information. Like the outcome and the learnings and the trainings from that model like is beneficial to them, but like they don't want to necessarily share that with every competitor that they have out there also. So that's a use case where you might want to share it on or distribute it on-prem instead of multi-tenant cloud.
Interesting. So not only like sensitive user data, but like proprietary stuff. I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're ready to do this thing. So the classic first question is, paint me a picture, please, Mark. You may know or may not know that I'm pretty new to tech. I started in just 2019. And so I don't have a good mental model of what things were like before. What did you call it? The space, the cloud native space.
Sure.
And so what problems existed in the space that caused SchemaHero to get created?
Yeah. So I can start with a little bit of kind of how this problem was solved before Kubernetes, and really still kind of is solved today.
So we're going to go before Kubernetes, then before SchemaHero. Interesting. Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, there's a lot of, a database, has a schema. Most databases anyway, have a predefined schema that will change over time as the application matures. You might need to add a column, drop a column, add new tables, index changes, views, all the different things that you need to do. And that, like, the language that you use to program those is, it's generally called DDL, and it's like it's not commonly shared across every different database. Postgres, MySQL, like different databases have different implementations of this. The way that we would solve this before is generally a developer, when they want to make a change to a database schema, would write DDL. They would write an alter table statement, add a column, drop a column. But then you want to version control those. You want your CI to be able to deploy those. And there's a lot of tools out there in the market, Liquid-based, Flyaway, commercial and open source tools that can do this. We were doing this before Kubernetes, even at Replicated, using a Go tool called Goose, which helped just version control and write schema migrations. That
So
is, yeah,
let
how it,
me repeat this back to you to make sure I'm getting it because this is all new to me. So you're using a language called DDL to alter your schema as needed as your application evolves?
yeah, if you're using like Postgres or MySQL, exactly. It's that's the definition language that you're using that the database engine accepts in order to modify the underlying schema that the
Uh-huh.
database has.
Okay. Do you know what DDL stands for?
I think it's data definition language.
Database definition language?
Data definition language.
Oh, nice. Evolves. We have a question. Don't most
Yep.
application frameworks have schema migration, like Rails?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's the other way that folks like would handle this. Before SchemaHero, or if you didn't want to use a dedicated tool for it, Rails has schema migration. Um, some other tools do. Like Go has an ORM that handles schema migration. Python has, Django is a popular framework that does it. Those are very tightly coupled to the application and makes a few assumptions, around how you actually have your application deployed and how you like it's a monorepo, it's a Django app, or it's a Rails app. And honestly,
Mm-hmm.
like that's a great tool. If you
Mm-hmm.
are deploying a monolithic Rails app or a core Rails app that can handle the ORM for you, like it's probably the best choice here. And SchemaHero may not make a ton of sense.
Okay. So the problem is that it's tightly coupled with an app, but that's not necessarily a problem for some use cases, in which case
Exactly.
SchemaHero may not be the answer.
Yeah.
Cool. And I want to say, Steve's here. Hello, Steve. Thanks so much for coming. And thanks to Physium for your question and for being here. All right. So this is before Kubernetes. There are a couple ways that schema could be updated as an application evolves. Can you say as a new, like, I understand the word schema and the word migration, but I think together it might mean something a little bit different than the literal meaning I'm taking from it.
Yeah. So a schema, like what is a schema migration is the question,
Yes,
in this
yes.
sense. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, like let's say I have a table, I have an application and, it has a database and it has a bunch of tables. And one of the tables
Uh-huh.
has 6 columns in it. And I need
Uh-huh.
to, like, let's talk a really simple example here, and it's
Yeah.
an address table. And now, we need a new field in the address that we're going to store, or, we want to now store users' birth dates. And so I want to add a new
Uh-huh.
column into the database there that didn't
Yeah.
exist before. So I want to
Uh-huh.
go add that column in, define the type of data that's going to be stored there, define defaults, maybe any indexes in primary keys or foreign keys, and just tell the database that this column will exist now, and I'm going to insert data and read data back out of it.
Uh-huh. That's what I was getting from the context, but that's not what as someone so new to this space, like a
Mm.
schema migration, I would think this schema is over here and now I want to migrate it to over here. But really it's more like a schema evolution.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it's interesting because that does kind of relate to one of the challenges that we actually had, which led to us creating SchemaHero, because like when you're writing that initial syntax, right, a DDL statement that says alter table, add a column, um,
Mm-hmm.
that depending on exactly what you're doing, you probably need to know the current state of that database schema. You can't. You want to know, does that
Oh,
column exist? And if it doesn't, then I
yeah.
want to add it. And like, yeah, the syntax does sometimes have, create column if it doesn't exist type syntax in it, but not always. And sometimes there's also drift. Maybe somebody made a change to the database that was unexpected, and you want to be able to pull that back out. And like the idea of SchemaHero was really, instead of going from point A and then giving it imperative statements that turn to point B and then
Mm-hmm.
point C, you just said, here's a declarative way. I want it to look like this. Go figure out how to make it look like this now.
So in all the use cases we're talking about, we're always talking about an app developer changing a schema. Is this kind of app developer facing technology?
Yeah, that's the way we see it. We
Okay.
we have an SRE team who's managing the database itself, but the app developers for the different teams are the ones that are writing the schemas.
So the full schema of the database is opaque to the app developer.
The actual like syntax of how to create the column is yes.
Yeah, like what the full. So they think I want a column for birthdays, and is there a way for them to know whether that already exists or that's?
They so they probably know if it already exists because like they they're writing the code to actually like add this column. But the the idea of SchemaHero is they don't need to know if it already exists in the database. They can just say,
Okay.
I want this column to exist and I want it to be of this type. And maybe
Okay.
the column doesn't exist and then SchemaHero will create that column with that type. Maybe the column exists, but it's a different type, and then SchemaHero will convert it or migrate it to the type that's desired.
Okay. So Steve has to say, depending on the company, there are also data architects that might be interested in something like this, as opposed to just developers.
Yeah, absolutely. We have recently added support for early support anyway for a time series database called Timescale DB in SchemaHero, and we started really getting a little bit more into that space where there are the concepts around some of the time series data is not just adding a column, but you're defining retention policies and aggregation and like long-lived processes, which you can control through SchemaHero. And that, to that comment, like very much, we start to see more data architects actually designing that part of it.
So one problem is the schema migration as a result of imperative definitions of schema, right? And yes. Then the other problem is knowing whether something exists. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get a better understanding of. Or maybe you can just help me understand what I should write here. Like,
yeah.
So what should I write here for that to represent that problem?
Well, I think one way to explain it might be like kind of the story of why we actually created SchemaHero to begin with. Like we were shipping software on-prem. We weren't controlling it. We didn't have access to those environments. And it included a Postgres database that had tables and schemas, and we were evolving the product. We were iterating on the product and so modifying that schema. I had no idea when a customer was going to install the update, like we weren't requiring them to go version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4. We wanted to like say, great, you're on 1, now you can skip right to 4 or skip right to version 20. And like, I also didn't really know, like this is the kind of the scary part. I didn't really know if that customer had connected to the database and made changes to the schema. And the newest version of our application that we were deploying had very specific expectations that the database was going to look like this. And so instead of us writing imperative statements that tried to convert the schema to what we wanted, we basically said, you know what, a computer can do that. Let's write a declarative definition of what that schema should look like, and then let the operator, the SchemaHero operator, query the database, interrogate the database engine, understand what it looks like today, and then figure out how to write those imperative statements to like alter it and to convert it to the format that we want.
I'm smelling a technology definition coming on. What is SchemaHero?
We like to call SchemaHero, so it's a Kubernetes operator, but that's just how we're delivering it. It is declarative database migrations, schema migrations.
Declarative database schema migrations.
Yeah.
And then I imagine, since it's in Kubernetes, it's a Kubernetes operator. The control loop is a part of that. So you declare it, and then the computer can move it closer and closer to get desired state in sync with actual state.
Yeah, exactly. We built it and we use it with GitOps. In particular, we're using Flux to deploy our database migrations. And so we have a developer who will take a YAML file, which is a custom resource that defines what a table should look like for a Postgres database or whatever the engine is, and it gets deployed into a GitOps deploy repo, along with the stateful sets, the services, the deployments, all the Kubernetes manifests. And then that gets deployed to the cluster where that control loop, that reconcile loop in the SchemaHero operator will actually go make the change to, for us, it's making a change in an RDS instance, but it connects to the database and makes the change.
So I want GitOps, I think, when organizing the information to be like a benefit of SchemaHero. So I'll start a new place for that, and then maybe it's just like a central place where, as we talk about different things SchemaHero can do, we'll add the benefits in. So there's our definition. I want to capture this. Data, what is it again?
Data definition language.
Vocabulary was the hardest part about joining this field. So sometimes when I'm splitting hairs about what things mean exactly, that's why. And so
acronyms are so bad.
It's true. So now we want to go over benefits of SchemaHero. So GitOps enables database schema. GitOps enables. What am I trying to say?
Yeah, I mean those. That's it. Like we can help kind of think about the sentence a little bit, but it's like GitOps. Like it doesn't have to be GitOps, but I think that's one of the biggest benefits of it. Is it like enables a GitOps way to deploy database schema changes regardless of the current, without having to know the current state of the database. It's a lot of words.
I'm going to break it up into 2 bullets. Schema changes. So not having to know the current state of a database and being able to change it, that seems good, but it also seems like in your example when you talked about someone who wants to make a column that does already exist, but they want a different type and they're able to just change the type. That seems a little dangerous to me, honestly, because what if something else is depending on that column and that column being that type?
Yeah, right, exactly. So one of the things by deploying it through GitOps, you can actually get, and this isn't necessarily unique to SchemaHero, but the pattern that SchemaHero encourages around a GitOps deployment model really allows you to couple the application deployment with the schema migration, so that you don't have, you really just don't want sequenced and carefully orchestrated deployments into your production environment where you're like, okay, I wrote this code in a database change. I need you to deploy this, verify it, then deploy this, then, and here's the rollback. It allows you to just say, here's an atomic, deployment, deploy it, and everything is going to happen.
And so this definition of the schema exists, and then it's something that everyone can look at. And so when they make changes to it, they can make sure not to step on each other's toes because they have a comprehensive view of what's happening instead of looking at a history and trying to piece it all together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we started before SchemaHero. We had, I mentioned we were using Goose, which was like, it's a very common open source Go based schema migration tool where we were writing these alter table statements, and we had a directory full of them. And if you wanted to know what did the database look like 6 months ago or a year ago, it was kind of tricky because you had to kind of walk back every single statement and build and construct that model in your memory, or you could spin up a database and deploy to that Git commit, but that's non-trivial to do sometimes. And with SchemaHero, like the state of all of the tables exists in one place, the way that we have it structured, so that I can just go to the commit history in GitHub and look at it and say, okay, yeah, like that column didn't exist on this day. It's very easy for me to see that.
So you construct the database state by reviewing the history.
Yeah.
As opposed to having it declaratively defined. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So it enables a GitOps approach to database SCADA changes, and you don't have to know the current state of the database in order to do that, or for anything.
Yeah.
You don't have to know to do that, and you can know if you want to by looking at the definition of the database schema.
Yeah,
We have a question from Steve.
Oh, great.
So do you have to declare the entire schema each time?
So the way that we have it right now, no, you don't. You can just deploy. So SchemaHero is a Kubernetes operator, and there are a couple of different custom resource types. The one that's the most interesting one to talk about right now, I think, is the kind table. And you can deploy a kind table. It sits in the cluster as a custom resource. The reconcile loop watches for changes to that in particular, and then will make the changes that are it'll construct the changes necessary and execute them against the actual database when you need to. If you have 500 tables in your database, you don't need to deploy all 500 each time. Like SchemaHero won't say, oh, that table is missing, I'm going to delete it. There is a way to do that, but it's not the default because that seems very dangerous just to like delete tables that didn't exist in the cluster.
So SchemaHero has a resource to define a database, and then it has resources to define tables within that database.
Yes.
Cool.
And then there's one other right now, and that is a resource to define the actual migrations. And like this, like right now, the way that we look at that's like an internal custom resource type. When you deploy a table, SchemaHero automatically creates the migration type with the generated SQL DDL statements in it. And it shows you this is exactly what I'm going to run. You can configure SchemaHero to run in one of two ways. One where it just writes that into the cluster, and you can say you could get migrations and view all of the generated DDL, and it'll show you when it executed it, when it ran it. There's also a more like, I don't know, like maybe you're a little bit less willing to like let a Kubernetes operator have full access and do crazy things to your database. So you can actually have it in a workflow so that you can actually tell SchemaHero, this SchemaHero will tell you I generated this migration. It'll show it to you, and you can say approve or reject it, and it only executes at that point.
Can see changes before they're applied.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of it's comfort to some degree, and you just want to really get comfortable knowing that it's not going to do anything really bad.
Yeah, and we see that in other technologies too. I think it's really valuable. I'd be interested in, and you know better than me how you want to organize your information, but I'd be interested in going over those custom resources again and capturing what each one does. But we also have another question from Steve, so let's honor that question and then we'll move on. Oh, I think he maybe wasn't done with it. It says, would it also be valid to say?
Maybe more, yeah.
So we'll give Steve a minute, and then so SchemaHero custom resources. You mentioned a database. Is it called a database? Just like database?
It is. The first one's called a database, and that one is really just think of it as like a link to the actual database. It'll be the credentials, the host name, the URI, everything that's necessary for SchemaHero to connect to that database. Wherever that database lives, it's like it could be a database that's running in Kubernetes as a stateful set. It could be running in Amazon RDS as a managed service. It doesn't really matter as long as the SchemaHero operator can connect to that database and can manage
it. It has credentials and what else?
A name.
Okay.
And it doesn't. So the credentials, we can dive into that for a second. Like the first versions were, here are the credentials to the database, but now you can also provide Vault, HashiCorp Vault configuration or AWS SSM configuration, and SchemaHero can use Vault as an example to generate just-in-time credentials, like single-use credentials for the database, so you don't actually have to put a database password in SchemaHero.
Vault config to generate temporary credentials.
Exactly.
We have Deshaun's here, Java Grunt's here. Hello, thanks for coming. Cool. So we have a database, and then we have a resource called a table. Is it just called a table?
It is called a table, and that's generally what the developers are going to right? They're going to define all of the tables as different table objects. And a table defines everything about the table, from the columns that exist to indexes and primary keys and defaults, and it defines this. It's a YAML representation of that schema, and it references which database that schema should be applied to, obviously.
So references a database.
Mm-hmm.
It's what developers interact with, and it's where it's a YAML definition of the scheme of what?
Of the tables, of the desired table schema.
Okay. Love it. And then you mentioned a third one that helps you see the changes, but I don't remember it.
Cool. The third one is it's a migration, and that's actually, interestingly, that's kind of where folks who aren't using an ORM like Rails would write before.
I don't know what an ORM is.
So an ORM is an object. It's an object relational model. It is a very language specific or even framework specific implementation of schema migrations.
Oh goodness.
And more.
Okay.
That's what, when we were talking earlier, the question around, what about a application framework like Rails or Hibernate or Django? Those are ORMs that will handle all of this for you automatically.
Oh, so ORM, object relational model, is tightly coupled to an app framework and handles migration.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And I think it's somewhat fair to say that if SchemaHero tries to kind of, it's more than this, but like one thing it does is it tries to fill the gap. If you don't have an ORM, or you can't run an ORM because of the way you have microservices or the way your app is deployed, SchemaHero fills a lot of that functionality back in for you. Not the runtime side of the ORM, but the schema migrations, that part of what an ORM does, SchemaHero tries to do.
Cool. So we have a lot from Steve, and then we need to get back to this migration object.
Okay.
SchemaHero is a language in DBM's agnostic deal generator that is Kubernetes native. Maybe you can help me decipher this, Mark. As database user, I can use SchemaHero as a service and not care about the language or underlying DBMs. What's a DBM?
I think it's a database management. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that this is, yeah, exactly. I think Steve just put a comment in. It's a DBMS agnostic DDL generator, and I think that's a very accurate statement. Yeah.
Okay, so a language agnostic DDL generator that's Kubernetes native. So as a database user, you could use SchemaHero as a service and not care about the language or underlying database management. Cool.
I will say to that, though, there's kind of like one caveat, because we made a decision early on that we didn't want to create a generic abstraction and say, this is what a table looks like. You can apply it to Postgres, you can apply it to MySQL or Cassandra or anything. Because the database engines themselves have different capabilities. So, and different types that they support. So the YAML looks very, very similar between Postgres and MySQL and Cassandra, but there are, like, the syntax can be a little bit different depending on what underlying database engine you're deploying it to.
And how does SchemaHero manage that different syntax?
In the table, when you define the schema, what one of the parent keys is either like Postgres or MySQL or SQLite or one of the supported ones, and then it knows how to unmarshal, how to read the YAML here and apply it to that database.
Okay, that's cool. There's a lot happening. This is great. So Fuel Snabel's here. Fuel Snabel's his hi, welcome Fuel Snabel. Fuel Snabel's role on the show is to come to join the stream and tell about a worst case scenario, some sort of way that they've suffered about whatever it is we're talking about that day. But they do have a question. What about SQL Server? What about it?
So today we don't we don't have support for Microsoft SQL Server in it. There's an issue, and it seems to be getting a lot of upvotes on it lately, but we haven't. I don't run SQL Server, so it's not like an area of my expertise or anybody on our team. It's an area that it definitely makes sense for SchemaHero to support SQL Server. There's requests for it. It does not support it today.
Handles different syntaxes for different DBs. There's probably a better way to say that.
Yeah.
And is that a big benefit? It seems like a big benefit to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
DB types, brands types, providers. I like providers. All right. So we have some questions from Fuel Snabel. If I recall correctly, Postgres has a bunch of extensions. How do you cope with that?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And the answer is like partly today we do. Like on one extreme, one example is timescale DB, which is an extension in Postgres that gives time series a lot of extended functionality. And so SchemaHero has built out support for timescale DB, where there was, functionality like continuous aggregates that database engine supports that does not exist in Postgres. So we modified the YAML syntax that if it's a timescale DB, it's a superset of all of the Postgres extensions. So you can actually have that functionality built in. And we kind of look at it as really, it's like a first-class citizen. And timescale DB is inside SchemaHero. But right now, Cassandra has a few extensions too on top of it. We don't generally support any extension. There's other ones though that it's really going to kind of be dependent on the extension. There's an extension that we use called PG Vector, which really just defines a new type inside Postgres, and that's supported in SchemaHero. But extensions that create functions maybe won't be fully supported inside SchemaHero right now, unless we build support for them as into the project itself.
Cool. So some are and some are not, is what I'm hearing. Thendal's here. Hi, Thendal. Thendal says time series. What are those great things that I never did get working properly? So good to see you, friends. Thanks for being here. We have a lot more questions from Fuel Snabel. Does schemas include functions and Sprock? So I guess you were kind of just speaking to that. You talked about functions. Mm-hmm.
Right. You can create functions in, I think Postgres is the only one that we support deploying a function in the SchemaHero syntax, not stored procedures yet. I think that there's another issue that I think there's a lot of comments on it, but we don't have support for deploying stored procedures right now.
Right on. And is stored procedures the part of the database that contains logic? Like if database logic?
Yeah.
How's that? Is that the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that I've used stored procedures in the past is really more like it's a function that I'm deploying to the database, and it can be optimized in the database, and then I can just call that instead of having to write a lot of SQL in my code that has to be interpreted at runtime.
Yeah. And that's what a function is the logic that's in the database. Sorry, I just don't know the database terminology. Okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah.
And then how do you handle upgrades?
So I think the question is really around how do we handle upgrades of the schema itself? Because there's actually a lot of different upgrades.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. Okay, I think we're good with Fuel Snabel. Thank you so much for all your questions, Fuel Snabel. Let's talk about this migration object, custom resource that SchemaHero makes.
So once you've deployed a table, and the reconcile loop in the table looks and says, oh, this actually doesn't match the current database. Maybe if there's a new column or a change of a column type. the operator will create a migration custom resource and deploy it to the cluster.
Ah.
And then the body of that really is, I think it's just called generated DDL, and it has the alter table statements that you otherwise would have written by hand. And it shows you this is what SchemaHero thinks. It's named with a SHA, the 7-character SHA that references that table syntax, right, or the table schema right then. And SchemaHero writes the DDL statements in this custom resource called a migration, and it stores it there for you. Like that's how it basically communicates back to you the commands that it actually wants to execute against the database.
So if a table gets out of sync, which would happen if someone like manually messes with it outside of SchemaHero, then then SchemaHero will create a migration to figure out how to get back I guess it gets out of sync if you just want to update it too, right?
Yeah, and we don't today, like this is an interesting topic that we haven't figured out the right way to handle. Really, if the reconcile loop is watching the table objects to see if you deployed a new table object. It doesn't watch the database schema in the actual database. So if somebody goes into the database and modifies the schema, SchemaHero is not going to know about that. So it's not going to try to bring it back. But the next time you deploy that table object, you wanted to add a new column in, it might opportunistically say, oh, well, there's this other change that shouldn't be there. I'm going to also do a little bit of drift detection right now and bring this back in.
Okay. So it's generated DDL that helps make the desired state of the table equal the actual state, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And while I'm writing that, Fuel Stumble has another question. How do you handle difficult changes like splitting columns?
The answer, like the same as the answer kind of a couple of questions, is like sometimes we do it right and sometimes we don't have support for it. Right now for that question, I think the answer is, for very basic scenarios, we can. Like if you can handle it with defaults and an alter table statement, SchemaHero can probably handle it also. SchemaHero, though, does not do data migrations. And so a tool that a lot of other languages or a lot of other frameworks provide is data migrations, where you can say, oh, I need you to generate write some code that actually splits a column and splits it into two different things. SchemaHero does not let you write code right now. It has to be done, executed as a DDL statement at the end.
Cool. Are there any other notable SchemaHero custom resources that you'd like to tell us about?
No, those are the ones.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it to you to lead us to the next thing we need to know about. You'd like to teach us about SchemaHero.
Sure. So there's a couple of other areas that I think we can talk about. One is, I said it wasn't a data migration, but it does have ability to do seed data. And I'm happy to talk about that. An example that we do is we will deploy feature toggles, or our dev environments have seed data, and it might just be 10 or 20 or 100 different accounts that are fake data that our test suite needs to exist in order to operate. So in the schema table file, where you're defining here are the columns, at the bottom you can actually provide data, and SchemaHero will ensure that data exists in the table when the table is created or modified. It depends very heavily that your data has a primary key, so that it can insert or ignore or something along this lines. But it's not really designed to put 10,000 rows in a database table, but if you have 10 or 20 rows that you want to put in, we found that to be a pretty useful way to deploy small amounts of data that's persistent, and you want it to be available in every instance that's running.
Cool. So it can seed data in a newly created table.
Yeah, or you can have an existing table that you've migrated to SchemaHero and then just add seed data to it, and then SchemaHero, even if you didn't change any of the columns when you deployed that table object, SchemaHero will write that seed data to that table.
So it can seed data in a table, period.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Let's before we get on to other more cool stuff, let's back up a little and review what we've already talked about and see if there's some other benefits of SchemaHero um, that aren't related to these side things that SchemaHero can also do.
Great.
So right now I have it enables a GitOps approach, which is a super big deal. You don't have to know about the current state of the database to be able to make changes or for GitOps. You can see the changes before they're applied, and you can handle different syntaxes for different, or SchemaHero handles different syntaxes for different database providers. So yeah. I have a question about that one. So if you wanted to switch from, do you support CockroachDB, like Postgres?
We do, yeah.
Okay, Postgres to Cockroach. You could just change that field in your table where you defined it. Is it that easy?
Likely in that scenario, it would be that easy. Yeah. Like, it's, if you wanted to switch from Postgres to SQLite, it may not be that easy because some of the types might not be supported. You may have some other challenges to do there.
Okay, but that's cool that you're not so tightly coupled to a certain database choice with this option.
Right. And I think, on that note also, the ORMs make it really easy for a developer who knows, let's say Rails, let's keep picking on that scenario here, to say, I know Rails and I know what I want my application to do. I don't need to think about the underlying database and how to get it from A to B. And SchemaHero really does attempt to do the same thing. It's YAML. So it's not like quite as tightly coupled to the framework and the application development cycle as Rails might be, but it's still, we think it's better than having to like teach, kind of pretty obscure, alter table statements that you need to really think about how to like learn that, and you end up with kind of more specialization and expert, a couple of people with expertise in that on your team often.
So this ORM experience for the frameworks that support it is a good experience, and you're trying to replicate that experience for either like in use cases where you don't want your database schema to be tightly coupled with your application, or in cases where the application framework that you're using doesn't have a good ORM, because it sounds like not all of them do.
Right, exactly. I mean, and we're not trying to be a language agnostic ORM. It just happens to be that if you don't have access to an ORM, ORMs do a couple of different things. And we're taking one side of that, which is schema migrations, and saying that's really valuable, but there is a way to do it that's not built into, it's a smaller thing that you can actually run as in a GitOps deploy pipeline and everything.
Cool. I want to make sure I'm organizing the information correctly. What I'm getting is like there's this main feature of SchemaHero, which is define your database schema declaratively, and this is where we're kind of capturing some benefits of that, and like and then we have some other cool stuff on the side that you can also do that isn't related. Okay, you agree with this organization model?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
There's some other cool stuff that I think are. I said other cool stuff, but I actually think that they are benefits of SchemaHero, not in the other cool stuff column that we can talk about.
That's what okay, so we'll talk about some benefits. FuelStumble is going to entertain us with a horror story like FuelStumble often does. There's a question in there too, but we'll tell the story and then ask the question. Data migration is kind of what I face often, so it's obviously close to my heart. Like split name into first name and last name columns, estimate time 30 minutes. How hard can it be? What actually happens is switch from a whole different server, and it takes 2 hours. And FuelStumble also says they avoid ORMs. They haven't said why. And then Steve's like wondering if FuelStumble has any non-painful memories. That is a good question, FuelStumble. Or do you have any like skipping through grassy knolls, looking at rainbows and butterflies stories? So. And that brings, how do you handle difficult changes like splitting columns?
Yeah. So we talked on this for a minute earlier, but
Okay,
like
sorry.
we don't
Yeah.
really today. Like
Okay, cool.
most harder scenarios there is not what SchemaHero does.
Mm-hmm. Fuel Snowball says they enjoy their shader coding. If you do, Fuel Snowball does a lot of cool shader coding. They're always posting cool stuff on Twitter and such.
Cool.
So, thank you for that detour. Let's talk about some things that fall into the benefits of Schema Hero column.
Yeah. So I think that the other one I want to chat about is the workflow enablement that it creates,
Mm-hmm.
and I can kind of explain what that means. So when SchemaHero, you deploy a table, SchemaHero creates a migration, and then we'll apply that migration to the database. But it doesn't have to be exactly that. It's written as a Kubernetes manifest that may not even necessarily you can there's a field in the table which is set to immediately deploy, and you can set it to true or false. If that's set to false, SchemaHero gives you the generated DDL migration, but doesn't automatically apply it. And you can use a kubectl plugin, kubectl SchemaHero, approve migration, and then it will actually execute it. So it gives you the ability to have developers say, I want to run these migrations, but they're still kind of, let's call it human in the loop if you want, where you can say, I'm going to look at these migrations and say, yeah, I approve this, go ahead and run it. Part of the value of this, though, kind of when we think about workflows, is that these are all YAML files with open API schemas that are well defined, and they sit in Kubernetes. So if you wanted to write open policy agent or Caverno or any kind of policy against them to prevent certain types of changes from being deployed, you actually could, which gives you kind of organizational level control over what can and can't get into the database schema.
Mm-hmm. So we already talked about seeing changes before they're applied. Before you can generate changes before they're, because you can generate changes before they're applied, you can therefore validate or compare, run policy enforcement on those
Yeah,
changes before they're, okay.
exactly. You might have a policy that like you could write in Rego and deploy it that says every table has to have a primary key, and
Uh-huh.
then when it would actually reject you deploying a table that didn't have a primary key defined. It's not a SchemaHero feature. It's just like because
Mm-hmm.
of the workflow that SchemaHero enables, this makes it possible to use other tools in the CNCF ecosystem that you may already have deployed.
Okay. Cool. Fuel Snowball would like to know, where can they find and test Schema Hero?
Great. So I think the first comment, like you had put a link to it, but it's just schemahero.io is the
Mm-hmm.
site.
And then the second question, why is this connected to Kubernetes?
So that's an interesting question. It's not actually interestingly connected to Kubernetes. It is a Go open source, Go CLI, and you can completely run all of this outside of Kubernetes. Where Kubernetes helps is in two places. One, it has a place to store these custom resource types. So you can historically look at, kubectl get migrations and see all the migrations that have run. If you have a different system that you want to store those migrations, great. Or if you don't want to store them, you don't need that to do that. But the real benefit of Kubernetes in this case is really it's that operator in the reconcile loop that's always running and always watching. But to that question though, it's not like only for Kubernetes. Like we built it expecting that there's a reconcile loop, and then even in a lot of our scenarios, we just deploy a SchemaHero pod that just has the SchemaHero binary in it and runs it because we might not have access to deploy a custom resource definition into the cluster.
Cool. How are we doing on benefits of Schema Hero?
I think I'm looking down at the list that I wrote
Okay.
to make sure we didn't miss any. I think that's the main benefits of SchemaHero.
Great. Maybe we'll stumble upon some as we're talking about more stuff.
Sure.
Cool. So other cool stuff, you can see data in a table, period. There is a literal period there, it's small. It has, you said that you talked briefly, you just mentioned on the side this kubectl plugin. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the kubectl plugin does kind of two things. One, it's distributed through crew. So you can just kubectl crew install SchemaHero, and then you get the kubectl plugin.
What's crew? How do you spell crew?
Just K, of course, KREW.
Okay, thank you.
It's a Kubernetes SIG that's it's like brew. It exists for the Mac. This is not like our project. This just exists out there, but it's like a way to distribute kubectl plugins. But the kubectl plugin will install and upgrade SchemaHero itself in your cluster. But it also can interact with the objects. You can, like an example is you can actually say kubectl get migrations, and then because it's a custom resource, the Kubernetes API server will show you all the migrations that are sitting there pending or completed or running, executed, whatever those are. But if you use the kubectl plugin, so instead of kubectl get migrations, you type kubectl SchemaHero get migrations, the output's a little bit different. We could kind of do that better, but you can actually say kubectl SchemaHero approve migration or reject migration. And that's how, if you have the human in the loop style workflow where you want to look at the DDL and say, I approve it, that's one of the ways that you can approve it. All that really does is sets a approved at date in that custom resource. So there's a lot of other ways you can do it, but that's like a really easy CLI way to do that.
I'm fascinated by the kubectl plugin because I haven't heard of that approach. Like every other tool I've worked with has their own CLI.
Yeah, we chose that way. It is just its own CLI, right? And that's really all a kubectl plugin is. It's really just, we looked at it as kind of distribution. Like, we think that every developer out there who's in that market of I want to operate a Kubernetes operator probably has kubectl installed. So why do they have to learn a new, why not just kind of conform into that? And then the other thing we get is by packaging it that way, we're able to leverage in the code, we're able to leverage all of the kubectl flags for how it'll parse the kube config and how it connects to your Kubernetes API server. That all works. And so if you can execute kubectl commands, you'll also now be able to execute SchemaHero commands without having to authenticate and everything. It's already there.
Nice, I love it. And the syntax is already familiar.
Yeah, hopefully we keep this that's the get migrations, and we keep the syntax very similar. So yeah.
Yeah. So you said it's one of the ways you can see the changes before they're applied. What's another way to see it?
So if you're running it in the operator mode, you don't need the kubectl plugin. It is a custom resource called migrations. And so if you go to the namespace that the table was deployed to, you can just kubectl get migrations, and you can -o YAML in very Kubernetes format, see the generated DDL statements that it's going to execute. And when SchemaHero goes to execute that, it executes exactly that statement that's written in that migration. It doesn't go recalculate it or anything. So if you decided, almost, but I actually want you to, maybe SchemaHero is going to add an index across 3 columns, and you decide, your DBA decides you actually want the ordering of those columns to be a little bit different than what SchemaHero did, you can actually modify that file manually and do it. And SchemaHero will apply the change that you actually made.
Cool. So with kubectl, there are ways to make imperative changes to things. So could you, even though the whole point of SchemaHero is have declarative database management, could you use this tool to make imperative changes to your SchemaHero?
You can use yeah, absolutely. You could use kubectl too, for sure. You could make it's interesting. I'm going to actually take that answer back for a minute. Sort of you're actually kind of making imperative changes to a declarative object, I think, which is then going to
which is okay.
Yeah, I think
the loop. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I'm confusing myself. So we have another question from Fuel Snubble. Well, some jokes. We have written and go. When is it going to be rewritten in Rust? And I only use Motley Crew for distribution. But and can you import a database schema to SchemaHero YAML?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great
So
question.
exactly. I mean, it's super important. So schema here, the kubectl plugin or the
Mm-hmm.
binary, the CLI has a generate subcommand. So we talked about like kubectl get migrations, kubectl get tables. It also has kubectl generate, and you pass in, oh, this is a Postgres database, and here's the URI, and it will connect in, iterate through all the things that it knows about, tables or views or types or anything like this, and write
Mm-hmm.
all of those objects out to the current directory as YAML files. It'll show, defaults and everything that's necessary. Like, and I think we even have like a test on this where we have a relatively large and complex existing schema, and we generate a bunch of SchemaHero manifests from that, and then we apply it back and make sure that there are zero changes that it actually wants to apply to the cluster.
So I think I'm listening and problem solving at the same time. Is my audio bad right now?
It
Do I
sounds
sound like
okay to
I'm
me.
very far away? Okay.
No, it sounds fine to
Thank you
me.
for your comments, PJ. Let me know if it's better for you. So what I'm hearing is with the kubectl plugin tool, you can somehow supply it a database that already exists. Because of course, when you're coming in, if
Yes.
you want to use SchemaHero, it's likely you're already running a database. Um, then you can somehow feed it that, and then it can analyze it and then generate SchemaHero manifests
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
recreate that within.
Exactly. And it might be interesting to kind of go really in the weeds for a second on how that works, because
Uh-huh.
that might kind of explain how SchemaHero works.
I would
Um,
like to do that. Let me take a moment to troubleshoot my audio with PJ
sure.
because PJ's saying YouTube can't hear anything. I can't
Yeah.
imagine why it would be different for one and not the other. So that's a hard
It
thing
does
for
sound
me
a
too.
it does sound a little
So
bit better when you face that direction. I don't know what the microphone is there. So
when I face toward the computer,
yeah.
okay, I'm gonna try some things. My microphone. Can you hear me now? How's that? Is that better?
It's
I can
yeah,
see.
it sounds good.
Let me see what. Cool. Um, Now it sounds better. So I have a microphone like right up here. So I'll use this microphone in the future instead of using my AirPods microphone. I don't know if anyone cares about the nitty gritty. Thank you, PJ, for letting me know. Okay, so let's get in the weeds about how SchemaHero can know what it does to know about your already existing tables to generate manifests for them.
Yeah. So this is like, to set this up, this is exactly how SchemaHero works to even when you deploy a table with a new column, how it determines that that's a new column or the type is a little bit different or whatever that is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the database itself, let's take Postgres as an example. There's an information schema catalog that contains tables and views, and actually the schema itself is stored in the database, in an internal Postgres table. So when you type SchemaHero generate and you give it a connection string to a Postgres database, SchemaHero connects to the database, queries that information schema collection,
Mm-hmm.
and then knows how to parse it. And basically it's just a giant SQL statement like that, says, give me all the tables that match this, and then give me all of these columns, and it converts it to YAML and writes it out into disk.
I totally follow that. I'm trying to.
Great.
So let's talk about it. Like, what's a use case? Paint a picture for me of like a real life example where I have a table that exists, and what is my end goal? Like, I'm not using SchemaHero at all. I already have a table. Why do I want it? Like, what does SchemaHero? The table it's watching doesn't have to be, or the database it's watching doesn't have to also be in Kubernetes, right?
Correct. In fact, we use it against RDS databases a lot.
Okay. So basically I have a database off in space, and I want to be able to manage it declaratively. And so therefore I install this kubectl plugin, and I run kubectl generate or something like
SchemaHero generate. Yep.
SchemaHero generate, and then it's able to um, create the SchemaHero custom resources that I need to manage my database declaratively.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like 100% it's done, or are there any alterations I'm going to need to make to what's generated?
The goal is that it's 100% done.
Cool.
But we talked earlier around some different limitations where SchemaHero doesn't support stored procedures, for an example. And so if you have a stored procedure, it's not going to show up in that output. So you should probably you definitely should look at what it generated to say, yeah, this has everything that I expected to be in it.
Cool. Great. CRDs? Or yes. CRs, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. SchemaHero custom resources for already existing databases.
Yeah. And
let's say pre-existing.
The primary thing that you were asking, what's the use case and why would somebody do this? The primary reason we added this in was to, not everybody's creating brand new database schemas today. And when they do, they're not like, I'm in the market to find a good schema migration tool. You have a database, you have a problem. And it's just a way to connect to an existing database and test it out, or to migrate and switch to a different way to handle schema migrations.
Excellent. That makes so much sense. Cool. What else you got for me, Mark?
We can talk through, I can kind of go through the list of the database types that we actually support today.
Cool. I love it.
So we don't support Microsoft SQL Server. So we'll start with that one because that's a common question. We've even had it here. Like we want to, but we support what we think are some of the. So first we support the ones that we think are popular, other than Microsoft SQL Server, which is popular. But then we also kind of have some weird ones in here, or not weird, but like unexpected ones that we support because we needed them, particularly for us. It's actually, I think we even have a doc in the docs on how to add a new database engine in. It's not like ridiculously hard, but we support MySQL and Postgres, and that's where we started. And then we support Timescale and CockroachDB, which are flavors of very, very similar to Postgres in their implementation. And then we support 3 others, I think. We support Cassandra, and then SQLite and ArcuLite.
Is ArcuLite LITE? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically SQLite, but like horizontally distributed, so replicated, and not replicated.
Got it.
Yeah, distributed. We'll say that word.
Got it.
Yeah, and we just added ArcuLite support in recently because we switched to migrations, and we talked about it earlier. We switched a database that we were actually delivering as Postgres on-prem into an ArcuLite database, and so we added support for ArcuLite in, and then handled some migration and stuff like this, and SchemaHero delivers that.
Rad. And now I'm going to add not Microsoft SQL Server. Is that what it was called?
Right, not that one. Yeah. We've looked at some options because it's a big popular and it'd be worth doing, but we've also started looking at like some options around being able to take other open source tools that exist outside of SchemaHero and already have YAML syntax and have a lot more full feature, and being able to like use those right inside SchemaHero also to get additional support like SQL Server, stored procedures, things like that.
Excellent. We're doing it. I can tell we're close to the end once I've painted myself in the corner.
There's probably one other little thing that is worth mentioning.
Okay.
And it's definitely going to be maybe under the other cool stuff. It's not one of the big benefits of SchemaHero. It has a thing called
Good.
that we call fixture generation.
Uh-huh.
And so there's another command, SchemaHero fixtures. And the idea there is it's kind of the opposite of generate. You can give it a bunch of YAML and it gives you create table syntax for those YAMLs. It doesn't connect to a database. It doesn't look to see if like, how do I alter a table? It just assumes there's no database and you're going to go like from an empty scenario to create the entire thing.
So you input YAML?
Yes.
To the CLI. And then what does it output?
It outputs a text file with a bunch of create table statements, basically.
It outputs directions of how to make a database outside of like that you can apply somewhere that's not being watched by SchemaHero.
Exactly. And in particular, we use that specifically for like our test harnesses in our CI, where we'll just create we want stuff to be super, super lightweight and fast. And so we'll just create a stateful set that, honestly, I think in ours, it's just even a Docker container that has a database engine running. And then we generate a bunch of fixtures and just apply them into that. And then we have a known state of the database to start with.
So it's like for testing, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, if anyone has, looks like any more questions, now's a good time. I'm going to do a recap here pretty soon to make sure I have a good understanding, that we all have a good understanding of what's happening. But we have a question here. What does SchemaHero do when you try to go from MySQL to Postgres when there isn't a clean step? Does it mark the DDL in some way?
So you have to, SchemaHero, you have to go modify all the table objects to change it from MySQL to Postgres. So I think that there are kind of two scenarios here. One would be that, I don't know, Postgres has a UU, I'm going to kind of make up a scenario just to kind of explain it, but like Postgres has a type that MySQL doesn't have, and you're doing this, you're just not going to be able to like write that migration because the syntax of the YAML is going to be different. So you'll have to solve that problem when you write the migration. The other scenario is it might be that you're converting a type into something that can't automatically convert in the database. Maybe you're converting something from a text to a UUID or something like this, and the database can't automatically do that. SchemaHero does detect that the migration failed, and in that migration object will have it executed on this day and it failed at this time. Then you kind of have to figure out why, though. You have to look at the logs of the pod to figure out like what happened. But it is a little bit optimistic that you wrote YAML and it's going to run.
Another thing Steve says, and I'm wondering if you could verify, it sounds like fixtures emit database neutral DDL.
It's not database neutral because the schema definition has the kind, whether it's Postgres or MySQL or Cassandra or SQLite, whatever. It generates, instead of database neutral, it generates like clean database DDL. It assumes that you have an empty database, and then it's going to generate all the statements in order to migrate it to that.
So by clean is assuming an empty database is what that means.
Right. You don't even need to have a database. Like normal SchemaHero operations, you have YAML in a database engine that is running, and SchemaHero reconciles the two of those things together. In fixtures, it doesn't need the database running. It just says, "Great, I'm just going to give you SQL statements, and you figure out how to apply those."
Something like that. All right. Okay, I'm gonna try my best at a recap. Are we feeling ready for that? Do you feel ready for that?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, so first we painted a picture of not only what the world was like before SchemaHero, but what the world was like before Kubernetes. And so before Kubernetes, you'd use a language called DDL, which actually seems to still be prevalent. And DDL stands for Data Definition Language. You would use that to alter your schema as your application evolves. So some languages handle this. We talked about this has to do with the ORM, the Object Relational Model. But a possible problem, is that it's tightly coupled with the application. It's not necessarily a problem if they can be tightly coupled. But another thing is a lot of applications maybe don't have an ORM. Almost had problems with ORMs. Okay, so that's what happened before Kubernetes. And then Kubernetes came along, and while Kubernetes was here, before SchemaHero, you would have schema migration drift, because schemas were defined imperatively, so as a series of steps. You'd be like, I want to change the database, I want to add this column, and then a new developer comes along, it's like, I need this column now, and then a new developer comes along, it's like, I just want to create a whole new table in this database, and it's happening just as a series of steps, and there's no central place where all of that is being recorded or watched. So databases were, to understand what's going on in a database, you'd have to construct your database state by reviewing the history, and it sounds like that was done manually. So it was hard to know what the current database schema looked like. So that's why SchemaHero existed. It's a Kubernetes operator that does declarative database schema migrations. So that means, I guess, so your database can be defined declaratively, and then you can use, so Kubernetes part does two things. It gives a central place where your database is defined, and conventions of how it's defined. And then it also has that reconcile loop. So if your database ever gets out of the state that has been defined, it will reconcile back so that the desired state is equal to the actual state. I'm going to save the benefits maybe to the end. So SchemaHero has some custom resources that allow this to happen. So SchemaHero has a database, which is just the link to the actual database. So that's what has the credentials and the name of the database and that sort of thing, how you connect to it. But then there's also functionality where if you have a database like Vault, or you mentioned an AWS one that I forget now, but you can generate temporary credentials to only temporarily connect to that database too. But the long story short is that it has to do with connection. And then you have a table resource, and this is what application developers are going to interact with. So it references a database, and then it's the YAML representation of the desired table schema. And so that's where the schema is defined in probably many of these table objects per database. There's also a migration object, and a migration object is not made by a human. It's generated by SchemaHero. And it's in that DDL language, data definition language, and it generates that DDL that makes the desired table state equal to the actual table state. And part of it, what's good, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the benefits, but part of what's good about having that migration object is that you can see changes before they happen. So actually, let's jump into the benefits. So why do you want to define your application state at all? Like your database schema at all? And that is because, for one thing, it enables a GitOps approach to database schema changes. So you can possibly just make the changes in your schema, push it to Git, and then you don't have to worry about it at all. The Argo CD or Flux or somebody will take care of that. You don't have to know the current state of a database, so none of this like reconstructing what a database might look like by reviewing its history. As I just mentioned, a user can see the changes before they're applied, which is definitely a big deal. And because you can do that, you can also use policy enforcement. So you can make sure it's in compliance with the policy before those changes are applied to the cluster. And then finally, SchemaHero handles the different syntaxes that you need for different database providers. So that's it's easy, but it also like avoids vendor lock-in, I guess, if you want to switch from, what did we say, Cockroach to Postgres. That would be a pretty easy change, although there are some that are more difficult if the syntax of each other it doesn't switch as easily. But yeah. So then we have other cool stuff, like you can see data in a table, either a newly created table or one that already exists. You have a kubectl plugin, SchemaHero plugin. It's distributed via Crew, which is a package manager for kubectl, which I didn't even know about before today. So it can install and upgrade SchemaHero, but then you can also use it to interact with SchemaHero objects. Then users can use a SchemaHero generate command to create SchemaHero custom resources for pre-existing databases. And the very likely use case, you're already using a database somewhere else and you want to bring it in to Kubernetes so that SchemaHero can do this declarative management. That's an easy thing to do with a SchemaHero generate command. And then you can kind of do the opposite with fixtures. You can do fixture generation where you already have SchemaHero YAML and you can feed it to the CLI and it outputs directions in the same DDL language.
Yes.
Yeah, and this DDL language of how to make a database that's not being watched by SchemaHero, which can be good for like a testing scenario. So that generates clean database DDL, and by clean, it means it assumes an empty or non-existent database. And finally, we have supported database types. So MySQL, Postgres, Timescale, CockroachDB, Cassandra, SQLite, I guess you said that, RQLite, which is a distributed version of SQLite, and not Microsoft SQL Service. Yeah, so SchemaHero, again, is a Kubernetes operator that does declarative database schema migrations. How do you feel about that?
That's great. I gotta like that can make a good I'll either have to put that video on the website or like submit it to the next KubeCon for a talk. That's a great explanation.
Wonderful, wonderful. This has been such a pleasure to make with you. And I really appreciate everyone who's been here today and asked wonderful questions. And I really appreciate everyone who watches the video later. I think I forgot to mention to you, Mark, at the end of the episode, we dance our way out. Do you have anything you'd like to say actually before we say goodbye?
I have one kind of ask if I can, and that's like SchemaHero has been in the sandbox. It's a CNCF sandbox project. It's not like the Replicated's core business. We have a different business over here. We really did put it in the sandbox in the spirit of the sandbox to say, we created this thing that's useful for us. Let's see if it's useful for anybody else. The next step, it's been for like about a year and a half now. And so the next step for us would be, should we go after, make this an incubating project or not? And one of the things we need to do there is, be able to identify people who are willing to say, we use SchemaHero. So if you are hit us up in the Kubernetes Slack. We'd love to chat and just, see if there's anything that we can do or, help push the project along a little bit.
Excellent. Yes. And Fuelstone was giving me a hard time. I make it sound like we're dancing our way out. Do you have any last words before the death dance? Let's do this. Here we go. Let's see your moves, Mark. Are you ready? Goodbye, everyone. You got this. just lift it. Just a little raise.
Just like this?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, nice. We got it. Bye, everyone. Thank you.